Hi, everyone. I'm Humaira Ghilzai. I'm a cultural advisor, writer, and speaker. I mostly focus my projects on Afghanistan. Today, I have the host of the podcast, Monuments Woman, George Gavrilis, here with me to talk a little bit about him, about Afghanistan, about Monuments Woman podcast, and whatever else we feel like talking about. So, welcome, George.
Thank you, Humaira. It's a pleasure. And I am aware that I'm usually the one doing interviews, so I promise to be a good sport today and answer any question you throw my way.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, why do you do interviews, or what do you do for a living? Give us a little bit of background
Oh,
about
wow.
George.
Okay. So, so that question, the best answer I can give is that I've jumped in different careers and different jobs that have just excited me and where I've been able to learn. So I think that that's what defines all my jobs. They're things that teach me and where I grow as a human being. I started life thinking that I was going to be a political scientist. I'm going to get a PhD, I'm going to teach political science, international relations, that is where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. They're going to have to pull me out of a university on a stretcher, right? Because that's the only way I'm leaving. And after a few years, I kind of tired of academic life and I wanted to do other things. And so for a while, I was leading an NGO that was doing a lot of dialogues on issues that are really important in the Middle East, the Hollings Center for International Dialogue. We did a lot of work on Afghanistan that was very exciting as well, because Afghanistan was a really big part of our purview as we're Central Asia, not just Middle East. And along the way, I realized that both the times that I was in political science and doing research and in some of my later work, I was like, oh, I am really curious about how things work or why things fall apart in society and politics in different places. And the way I was unlocking that was by doing really deep field interviews with people for my research. Or getting people to open up in some of these sensitive dialogues that we were doing at the Hollings Center. And I realized that I had this skill in getting people to open up and to share things that they otherwise wouldn't. And I realized that I wasn't making the most of that in the jobs that I was doing. And so I segued more and more towards oral history projects, which are all about the interview, all about listening to what the person across you is really saying and knowing what questions to ask, what not to ask, and how to ask them. And I think that that's when I started talking with Lori and Teresa and Christian about doing a podcast. It all kind of fell together in a funny way because of that skill that I had unintentionally honed over the years.
So by Lori, you mean the Monuments Woman podcast subject, Laura Tedesco. And normally you refer to the producers as the producers, but you just said their names.
Yeah, did I do something bad? I'm not sure.
I don't know, but it's very exciting. Tell us more about this Christian and Teresa.
Okay, so it's a really interesting team because, so there's me, and I've said a little bit about me. There's Laura, or Lori as I call her, who is the star, and she's unlike me in the sense that she had a really good sense of what she wanted to do in life. And it ended up being archaeology through and through. And that's why she was such a remarkable person to focus on. And, people who have listened to the podcast will see just how powerful her way of thinking and speaking is. And then, of course, none of this would have been possible without Christian and Teresa, husband and wife. Christian is a documentary filmmaker. Teresa is somebody who has deep experience in the museum world, in the art world, doing all sorts of interesting projects and curations. And then she moved over into production once she left the museum world. And we were friends for many, many years. And it was actually Teresa, I want to say it's been 13 or 14 years ago, when during one of my trips to Afghanistan, she said, I have a friend in Afghanistan, you must meet her. And that friend was Lori.
Oh, so she connected you and, well, I call Laura.
It was meant to happen.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It was meant to
Better be,
happen.
I
Yeah.
better be careful. That Teresa, she's pretty sneaky on how she does things.
Teresa
So
has this art at connecting the dots, and not everybody can do that. And but she's also hilarious and funny, as you've come to know. And she also does not want us talking about her because she and Christian really wanted to be in the background of everything. But truth be told, if you and others enjoyed the podcast, it was because of their very artful way of saying, of editing and knowing what would work. And also in some cases telling us, George, nobody's going to care about this rabbit hole that you're going down right now in your conversation with Lori.
like
Switch it up, say something
Teresa,
else,
like
right? Blunt, painfully blunt, but I love it.
So I love the podcast, but it's partially because I have known Laura for many years. I've been to some of those sites with her, and I've heard some of the stories, but then getting reminded of it and such has been really exciting. So just tell us about the Monuments podcast. Like, give us an idea of what it is and what did it start out with and what did it turn out as?
Well, we had a vision that, now mind you, the context is important, that we were talking about this well before the US pulled out. But we didn't start recording until the pullout started to take place. And once the Taliban was rolling across parts of the country, especially the South. So we felt a sense of urgency. And one of the things that we did not want to do is we did not want this to be a play-by-play commentary on what was happening, even though it was hard to not talk about some of these things as we were seeing them, as we were getting calls from friends who were like, you're not going to believe what just happened today in Kandahar, or Herat just fell, George. I never expected this, things like this. But we still wanted to stay laser focused, not on the headlines that people were going to get anyway, but on something that they were unlikely to encounter about Afghanistan. And that was this historic beauty of the country, the complexity of its people, and this mind-blowing cultural and historical heritage. Like we say in the very first episode, if things had gone differently for Afghanistan, it could have been like Greece or Italy. It would have been on everybody's bucket list. And instead, look where the country is. And we did not want people who were listening to only focus on the negative. We wanted them to understand just how incredibly important Afghanistan and the Afghan people and their cultural heritage has been to the civilization of the world.
Yeah, and I, as an Afghan, really appreciate that it's one of the few narratives that I've heard which didn't involve the recent history of Afghanistan, which has been pretty much war, but then this is the ancient history of Afghanistan and the monuments and how the Afghans love these monuments and it's part of their daily life and such. So I really appreciate that in a very a very kind and like compassionate way you and Laura are talking about Afghanistan, and of course your adventures there too. So what would you say to somebody who um, hasn't listened to the podcast? Would be a takeaway for them? Like, why would somebody, I mean, sell me on this podcast. Why would I spend my time with this George and Laura people talking about this part of the world that has been embroiled in war in recent history?
Well, because, okay, so there's a short answer.
Pitch.
Yeah, here's my pitch. And this is on the fly because I haven't thought about this for a while, but I'll tell you, if you think about things that we love in life, whether it's a book we read or something we want to watch or binge watch, it's never something that we already know a lot about, right? What we know best doesn't fully excite the human spirit. It's always the unknown. It's always the surprise. And that's what was so beautiful about this, that this is a country that surprises. And it's not just a country that surprises, it's a human being that surprises. Laura Tedesco is one of the most interesting, relatable, powerful human beings out there. And those aren't things that you usually see in the same person. So it's funny, like one moment she's making a joke, and then the next moment she's telling a really sobering story about what the work meant to her to be an archaeologist in Armenia, in Syria, in Afghanistan. So at the end of the day, the bottom line is, even if you don't care anything about Afghanistan, you're going to walk away from this understanding what it's like to be a woman in an all-male profession, what it's like to have a job that actually puts you in tremendous insecurity, but you have to do it because you got to raise kids, or what it takes. Everybody's been to museums, right? And you see pieces of something that's like 2, 3, 4, 5, 10,000 years old, broken. Like, you will never enter a museum again and see an artifact and look at it in the same way after listening to this podcast, because you have a keen sense of what it takes to pull something out of the ground, put it in a museum, and truly preserve it. And that's kind of a cool story.
No, that's so amazing. So the 12 people who are listening to your podcast.
We joked about that often. I'm glad you caught that.
Oh yeah. I did my homework, George. I have not only learned about Lori's experiences, but your experiences, and then met some of the people that you two have encountered in your work in Afghanistan, and one of them was Jamal. I loved hearing that episode. Can you just quickly tell us about like how that conversation went, and what is Jamal doing right now? What is he up to? Is he well? Is his family doing okay?
Yeah. Hey, thank you for asking. It's hard to talk about Jamal because he's not Jamal. That's not his real name. And we all decided that we wouldn't use his real name because of just the uncertain future in the country. He's fine, but that's because he's really strong and he's an optimist. And his role in life as a human being is to just be optimistic and to try to make things work. He's also one of those Afghans that still to this day is resisting leaving the country. And I try to think of, and so when we brought him on the episode, we wanted to hear from him. He is not an archaeologist. He's somebody that at some point in his life was a journalist, and then went into development work, had a lot of experience with really tough, challenging issues, knows so many Afghans who work in different professions, knows so many people like me that went to Afghanistan to work in different sectors. He's one of these people that is a problem solver, a bridge builder, but is also deeply educated thanks to his family, deeply in love with his country. And so he's okay. He's okay. He'd be a lot better if his country wasn't in the situation that it's in right now. And truth be told, I think that one of the things that bothers him more than even the Taliban having taken over is watching so many kids in Afghanistan die of malnutrition and hunger, and seeing so many people that previously had gainful, productive, exciting work be on the street selling things, just to get a little bit of money and to buy bread for the family. I think this is what deeply cuts to his core. Even though as a student of history, he understands that history is cyclical and that things will one day get better, just like they were good before they fell apart again.
Well, I think the difference between being a student of history and living the history is that you are actually witnessing it with real life. And I think for a lot of us Afghans, Of course, I'm a fair weather Afghan. I'm here in the US, thinking about Afghanistan way out there while my refrigerator is full of food. Um, but yeah, I think that more than anything, the girls losing their rights, the right to go to school, women not being able to work, seeing the collapse of the economy and people suffering, children, women, men, is really hard because that is something that was avoidable, that could have been avoided very easily. And we as the United States have been instrumental in causing that collapse, which somehow isn't getting, the information is not getting out to us Americans through our media. But going back to Jamal, he kind of sounds like you, curious, educated, follows his bliss from job to job. So I can see why you two were such good friends.
Well, we worked on a project together for the UN right before the Taliban started picking up momentum, and certainly before the fall of Kabul. And I think that that's what brought us together. That, he says things like, "Oh, thank you for being such a great mentor." I was like, "Are you kidding me? Do you have any idea how much I've learned from you?" Because we have this just interest in the world and how things work and how things don't work and why they fall apart, like I said earlier. And I think that really bonded us because he's not an old friend of mine. He's a new friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I've only known him for a few years, but it is one of those friendships, like true friendships in Afghanistan, where I'm going with this, that they burn strongly. They burn with a passion.
Sure.
Right. And there is something just so beautiful in our friendship, but there's also a sense of obligation, that we have obligations to one another as friends. Mm-hmm. And so we've talked about a lot of difficult things lately.
So you've been to Afghanistan quite a few times.
So it's interesting, but for all the times I've been in Afghanistan, I've spent far more time in Central Asia and the Middle East, especially Central Asia. And it was Central Asia that, in a kind of unexpected way, many years ago, connected me to Afghanistan. And I say odd because, or unexpected, because people sometimes will see Central Asia as including Afghanistan, but the Central Asian republics and Afghanistan could not be further apart in terms of their political situation today. And that's what brought me down there. But I'm not the expert on Afghanistan that Lori is. I just want to make that abundantly clear.
But you like qorma, which I think is, that's very deep understanding of Afghan food, because most people just say pullout or, Lori said mantu, but you like qorma, which I think is like, a little bit deeper. So tell me, when did you have your first qorma and what kind was it? Or tell me your favorite food experience in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it was. Now, and you pronounced it the proper way, the Afghan way. Most people that are into, let's say, South Asian food will be like, "Oh, korma," and it's very similar, not exactly the same kind of recipes, but it's a spinach one. I love spinach korma, and yeah, I know it's not what most people would expect me to say, but I like the kind of like the uniqueness of the combination. And
with meat or without?
Without.
Okay. I have a really good recipe.
Oh, excellent.
Well, so qorma sabzi is what it's called, right? Qorma of sabzi. It's actually, I don't know if you knew, but it's served in the Nowruz, in New Year, to bring prosperity to farming, and that green is going to translate into a good farming outcome. So there you go. You'll just have to make some qorma in March, which is qorma sabzi.